Spider basics beyond the 8 legs.
Hello YouTube! Welcome to episode 2 of Spider Basics Beyond the 8 Legs. In the last episode we investigated what makes a spider and not some other 8-legged thing, as well as what this series is going to cover, so if you missed that, you can click here to start at the very beginning. This time we're going to dive into the ecological importance of spiders, how they affect our world, our environments, and our lives. You may think you already know the answer to this, and I sort of thought I did too. But imagine telling Sheldon Cooper, "Yeah, I know what Star Trek is about. It's about people fighting Klingons in space." Like that's all there was to it. An ambulance would need to be called for one of you because that explanation doesn't even begin to cover it. Likewise, there's so much more to how spiders affect the world around them than what one might think. Most people don't think a whole lot about invertebrates at all, other than to figure out ways to avoid mosquito bites or keep caterpillars from eating what's in their gardens. Collectively, we've become a little more aware of the importance of bees as pollinators, because a large part of our food supply depends on them. But could spiders be just as important in similar ways? I'm going to look at 5 reasons why we should be paying attention to spiders, and how they impact the world we share with them. And I'll start with the most obvious. Everyone knows that spiders eat insects, but it's difficult to fathom just how many. Anyone who has ever gone camping in the woods may have wondered just what the spiders there had been up to after slapping themselves silly warding off mosquitoes. While spiders may not have wiped mosquitoes out, we can be certain that without them, our problems would be much, much worse. Now, you may be wondering, how in the world would we be able to figure out how many spiders there are on the planet, let alone how much they eat? A couple of arachnologists have tried to estimate how much insect prey the global spider community actually kills and eats. William Bristow tried it in 1947, and Albert Turnbull tried it again in 1973, and they both got very different results. But the best numbers we've got come from a 2017 study by Martin Niffler and Klaus Birkhofer. Niffler and Birkhofer had data available to them that Bristow and Turnbull could only have dreamed of, and they put it all to good use. They combed through the scientific literature and collected data on biomass per square meter. So, the combined mass of all the spiders in a given square meter of space in 7 different types of biomes, computing an average biomass of spiders per square meter for each biome type. Now, for anyone who Googles this later, there are different ways of measuring biomass, including dried weight, or mass of organically bound carbon. So for those people, these figures are done by fresh weight, or the weight of the entire live spider. Then they used current global land cover data to find out how much of each biome type there is on the Earth, and ta-da! They had a rough estimate of the standing biomass of spiders on planet Earth, which, by the way, came out to about 25 million metric tons. You know this thing? The Great Pyramid of Giza? It weighs about 6 million metric tons. So the weight of the world's spiders is a little more than 4 times that. As for how many insects these 4 Great Pyramids of spiders were eating, Niffler and Birkhofer made 2 different estimates, using 2 different methods, to see if different methodologies would arrive at similar numbers. In the first method, they looked at a ton of research on how much spiders typically eat in relation to their own body mass. In most cases, spiders eat about 10% of their own weight in food every day. Desert spiders eat less than that, and they figured that in. But they ran the math for the different biomes and biomasses that they'd computed and arrived at an estimate. In the second method, they looked at published studies examining actual observed predation rates for spiders found in all the different biome types and extrapolated from that. The first method produced a figure of 460 to 700 million tons of insect prey per year, which is a difficult number to imagine. The second method, which used a completely different data set and a vastly different approach, yielded a number of 400 to 800 million tons per year, more or less exactly the same range that the first method had. Generally in science, when you test a thing with multiple methods and from different angles and arrive at the same result, you're very probably in the right ballpark. Now, 400 to 800 million is a big range, but it gives us an idea of the magnitude of the numbers we're dealing with. It's not thousands of pounds or even thousands of tons, but hundreds of millions of tons of insects. It's the weight of 66 to 132 of these. So we're talking about a massive amount of insects that spiders are taking out of the game every year. And anyone who has tried to enjoy summer anywhere ever should immediately appreciate spiders for the reduction in annoying flies alone. But this is actually a much bigger deal than that. It's sort of odd that so many people in the world are deathly afraid of spiders when the reality is that the deadliest animal in the world is one that spiders regularly kill and eat: the mosquito. Female mosquitoes can carry and transmit malaria, which remains the leading cause of mortality around the world and killed 435,000 people in 2017 alone. We don't have compelling data on just how much spiders reduce the population of mosquitoes, but it's hard to imagine that they're not making a dent when they're killing 400 to 800 million tons of insects every year. And while malaria might not be top of mind for people here in North America, common houseflies are capable of carrying and transmitting dysentery, typhoid fever, cholera, staphylococcus bacteria, the stuff responsible for nasty staph infections, and a whole host of other pathogens. The American cockroach can transmit bacteria that cause food poisoning. Ticks can cause Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and a bunch of other diseases I'd never even heard of. So it really is a good idea to just let that spider keep living in your kitchen window or in the grass in the backyard. Because spiders prey on all of these, all the while not being vectors of disease themselves. Flies and cockroaches may be interested in landing on our food and contaminating it, but spiders are not. In fact, in a 1959 study in South Africa, spiders were settled in houses on purpose after researchers identified a social species that they figured was ideal for the task. Being written in 1959, the paper contains some delightfully dated language. In listing reasons why the spiders were ideal, the authors write, "They do not extend their webs except in the immediate vicinity of the nest. Thus, not even the tidiest housewife needs to be worried." Not even the tidiest one, ladies! During routine experimental handling of many thousands of individual spiders by children, only 4 bites were registered during 2 years. These bites did not even turn septic. The social spider is therefore apparently completely harmless and can be employed with safety in our homes. How did that go? Just like, hey kid, hold these for a minute, we want to see what happens. With the aid of social spiders, it might perhaps even be possible to re-establish the good old Free State custom of getting youngsters to sleep or rest indoors from 1 to 3 p.m. during the summer months. Okay, I have questions about this part. After putting a bunch of nests of these communal spiders on a couple of different farms, the housefly populations there went down by 99% within 2.5 months. Now that kind of reduction could significantly cut down on disease transmission. In addition to controlling populations of organisms that can contaminate our food, spiders also prey on organisms that can stop that food from even making it to our tables at all. The late Norman Platnick, who studied spiders his entire life and described more than 2,000 new species, said, "If spiders disappeared, we would face famine." It's tricky to know by how much spiders reduce harmful pests in agricultural crops, but we know they suppress populations of aphids, moths, and other pests that eat or damage the food we grow. This seems particularly true in orchards. Most spiders overwinter attached to plants or in leaf litter, so when field crops are harvested each year, they're mostly wiped out and have to repopulate the field from surrounding areas the following year. But fruit trees don't get cut down each year, so the spiders can overwinter undisturbed and establish thriving populations. A Polish study found that web-building spiders in undisturbed grasslands were eliminating 25 to 40% of the adult Diptera, the order of insects that includes flies and mosquitoes. So it's likely that if spiders everywhere decided they were tired of our nonsense and walked off the job altogether, insect populations everywhere would quickly skyrocket, and it wouldn't take long before the ones in the forests ran out of food and turned to our fields. In terms of food quality, spiders are now recognized as a key component of organic food production, as they are one of our best alternatives to pesticides. In one province in China, the use of spiders in fields allowed farmers to reduce their pesticide use by 70 to 90%. In England, a team of researchers got promising results when they looked into using a communal spider as pest control for the tomato leaf miner moth, which is a common pest on tomato and potato crops worldwide and which has become pesticide resistant. Surprisingly, there hasn't actually been all that much direct research done on spiders' contributions to agricultural successes, but we're starting to see a bit more of it. And many are starting to recognize spiders as key components of integrated pest management in those settings. And of course, spiders play a key role in preventing the spread of invasive species. For instance, Harmonia axyridis, the Asian lady beetle, is an invasive lookalike to North America's native ladybugs and competes with them for habitat and food. Here's a cellar spider in my kitchen taking care of one for me. Thanks, spider! I talk a bit more about this in my cellar spider video, which you can check out here if you're interested. So they eat a lot of stuff that would be a problem if it got out of hand, but also spiders themselves are an important food source for many other animals. For some birds, spiders make up over 30% of their diet. One forest in Switzerland had about 300 nest boxes for great tits put in 1986. In 1990, scientists rudely intruded into 10 of those boxes and mounted Super 8 video cameras, infrared flashlights, and photocells to trigger them during their breeding season. And by examining the photographs, they found that during the early breeding season, up to 75% of the biomass given to the nestlings was spiders. In 2017, researchers in Mexico examined the diet of the Alfred's rain frog, a threatened species of frog in Central America. For this, they had to actually capture the frogs and basically pump their stomachs, which sounds awful. This technique was developed specifically for frogs so that we could monitor their diets without having to kill and dissect them, which is good, and 99% of the time the frog is just fine, probably just very resentful about it. But the researchers tagged the frogs to ensure that they never made the same poor animal go through the procedure more than once. They found that spiders were one of the 3 top prey items for these frogs. And spiders make up at least parts of the diets of tons of other animals: bats, some fish, other invertebrates, including other spiders sometimes. And while we might feel a little less sympathy for parasitoids, creatures like the tarantula hawk, a kind of wasp, need spiders for their own reproduction, paralyzing a spider and laying an egg on it for the newly hatched wasp to feed on. And yes, even some humans eat spiders, on purpose, as they're a delicacy in some countries. So a lot of creatures rely on spiders as a significant source of food, creatures that are maybe easier to recognize as ones that we wouldn't want to lose. And that positions spiders as an important part of food webs in ecosystems, as both predator and prey. Apparently, nature occasionally finds it necessary to just hard reboot whole areas, just throw out the whole project and start over. Which is what happens when, say, a volcano erupts and covers a whole landscape in lava. Like in 1883, when the island of Krakatoa in Indonesia violently erupted in one of the most destructive volcanic events in recorded history. Trivia note, it was also the first major volcanic eruption to occur after the world had become connected via telegraph. So this was the first major disaster to truly become global news. The eruption and the ensuing tsunamis claimed over 36,000 human lives in the surrounding areas. The eruption essentially blotted out all plant and animal life on the small surrounding islands that make up the Krakatoa group. Less than a year later, French botanist Edmond Coteau visited the island and reported, "In spite of all my investigations, I was unable to observe any trace of animal or plant life, with the exception of a single spider. This hardy pioneer of resettlement was busy spinning its web." Within 50 years, more than 90 different species of spider had been recorded there, along with a growing ecosystem of plants and other animal life. A similar story occurred after the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980. Only 2 years after it had scorched its surrounding land dead, over 40 species of spider had established there. And it was found that they must have come from over 30 kilometers, which is about 20 miles, away. What makes spiders so good at this? How are they among the first to arrive in these decimated habitats? They can do this because of ballooning, which is how the tiny spiderlings of many spider species disperse after they hatch, and some can do it as adults. This sort of makes spiders the special forces units of the invertebrate world. They stick their butts in the air and let out a strand of silk that actually interacts with electric fields to produce lift. This lifts the spiders off the ground, allowing them to be carried by air currents after that. This little wolf spider is trying, but it's just not his day. Traveling like this doesn't really require the spider to do much, they're just along for the ride, so they can be carried higher and farther than many insects would have the endurance to fly. How high and how far? Well, between 1926 and 1931, some scientists flew a plane equipped with specially designed screens over Louisiana, exposing the screens at different altitudes to see what they could catch there, sort of like dragging a net through the water. Spiders were found at altitudes up to 15,000 feet, and were probably as surprised to be found as we were to find them. And how far? Well, Charles Darwin noted in his diary that he saw spiders being blown into the rigging of the Beagle when it was more than 100 kilometers off the coast of South America, and modern research and modeling suggests that they can go considerably farther than that. So they're sort of nature's paratroopers, being capable of dropping in behind the lines from the air, deep into uncharted territory, instead of having to gradually expand their range from a place they're already established. This, of course, might make one wonder, would that ability make them potentially invasive? Well, that's a great question, and we've seen talk about several potentially invasive spiders over the past decade. The noble false widow in Europe, and the brown widow and Joro spider in the US. In their native ranges, ballooning doesn't cause them to spread, because the surrounding areas may function as barriers, either because of unfavorable habitat, the presence of certain predators, or other factors. But when we put a species in an entirely new habitat, like taking the Joro spider from Asia and dropping it into the southeastern US, unexpected things can happen. Here, we need to understand what invasive really means. Invasive generally means that the organism has been transported, usually by human activity, to a new area, that it has established a self-sustaining population, and that it does tangible environmental or economic harm. Introduced means that it was brought to a new habitat, but seems to be able to coexist with the pre-existing ecosystem without doing any real damage. And sometimes it can be very difficult to determine which one a given species is. The noble false widow has a more potent venom, a longer lifespan, and a greater reproductive capacity than most of the native spiders in the UK, so it appears to be outcompeting some of them there. The brown widow seems to have a higher reproductive capacity than the southern and western black widows, and it also seems more aggressive specifically to black widows. So the early evidence is suggesting that it is displacing populations of black widows in Florida, California, and other places. The Joro spider, which just showed up in the southeastern US 15 years ago, appears to be spreading fairly quickly, and it also might be suppressing populations of native orb weavers. Now, none of these cases has had any major effect on us as humans so far, and in these cases it does often look like trading one species of spider for another that does more or less the same thing, so we don't see dramatic ecological changes to ecosystems. That said, we usually see a drop in the number of species in an area when a new one gets dropped in, and generally biodiversity, having a lot of different species around, is a good thing for an ecosystem, so seeing that go down should at least raise an eyebrow, and deserves our attention, because losing species to extinction is generally no good for anyone. This is almost always our own doing though. It's a possibility that the Joro spider has done so well in the US because the US doesn't have the same set of animal predators that eat Joros or compete with them for food. Even then, we rarely see invasive spiders causing major problems, like, say, the pine shoot beetle that can destroy forests. And speaking of forests, when spiders are established in an ecosystem, what do they actually do there? We probably all remember being taught about the food chain, and while the idea of a vertical food chain isn't entirely wrong, it could be less wronger. In ecosystems, there's more of a food web, and that food web is connected to the rest of the system, including the plant life. And this is where spiders play a key role in natural areas like forests. If we were to take a forest and forget about everything larger than, say, a salamander, for instance, down in the leaf litter environment, larger spiders would be near apex predators. And we've seen other cases where the abundance of apex predators can have a dramatic effect. A well-publicized example of this is the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park in 1995. Putting wolves back into the ecosystem after they had been killed off there in the 1930s ultimately resulted in greater biodiversity, healthier populations, and even more vegetation that in turn supported more life. How? The short version is that the wolves reduced the elk population and also kept them on the move, so the elk didn't stay in one place and overgraze on the stands of willow. That in turn provided better habitat for beavers, and beaver populations went up, which meant more beaver dams, leading to better water retention in the area, and better conditions for both more plants and more animals. This is called a trophic cascade, when a change at one level of the food web, or trophic level, creates effects that go beyond the trophic levels right next to it, creating a sort of cascading chain reaction that can echo through the whole ecosystem. Spiders do this in forests in ways we might not expect, and, as always, it's complicated, and can depend on a lot of things. For instance, in a fairly dry forest in Spain, reducing the number of larger spiders in the leaf litter caused an increase in smaller predators, which were the ones feeding on the decomposers like springtails. Thus, the rate of decomposition in those ecosystems went down, which slows down the return of nutrients to the soil, which then affects plant life. In other experiments in wet climates, removing spiders was actually found to increase the rate of leaf litter decomposition. So the direction in which spiders affect things like the soil nutrient cycle can actually go either way depending on the particular ecosystem. But what's certain is they have an effect not just on the population of their own prey, but on the health of the whole forest. If the ecosystem is stable, the spiders are helping to keep it that way. Finally, a surprising component of spiders' contribution to ecosystems is that they actually provide habitat to other organisms in some cases. This was news to me. There are a couple of different ways spiders do this. Some birds, for instance, actually use spider silk as a key component in their nests. Chaffinches use spider silk to attach lichen, twigs, and bark to the outer layer of their nests to act as camouflage. And on the more inner layers, it's used as structural material to bind mosses and other materials together. Some birds will even use spider silk to actually attach the nest to the tree. Some use it in the inner lining of the nest, as it's an ideal insulator and contributes thermal properties to the nest that help with egg development. Some birds even show a preference for certain kinds of silk from certain kinds of spiders common to their environment, because it's not all the same. Cribellate silk, produced by spiders that have a structure called a cribellum, uses little twisty microfibers to stick to things instead of a sticky glue like orb weavers use. This gives cribellate silk something called the Velcro effect. It can be attached, detached, and reattached to nest material multiple times, much more so than sticky gluey silk, and the birds actually know this and do this when they're building. Hummingbird young develop quickly, and the highly elastic spider silk used in the nest allows the nest itself to literally stretch as the hatchlings grow and take up more space. So this fascinating material that spiders produce is crucial to other animals in their environments. Some larger spiders that live in burrows have actually been found sharing their burrows with tiny frogs. These tiny frogs seem to have developed a relationship with certain tarantulas, much like cats have with humans. Research suggests that chemical cues on the frog are recognized by the tarantula, which otherwise might just kill and eat the frog. The tarantula allows the frog to share its burrow. The frog protects the spider and its egg sac from smaller pests like ants, while benefiting from prey remains left by the spider, and also getting a cool place to hang out during the day to stay out of the heat. Quite an adorable little relationship, really. At the beginning of this video, I questioned if spiders might be as important as bees. Well, let's review some of the major ecological services that spiders provide. Eating things, getting eaten by things, populating destroyed habitats, regulating established habitats, and providing habitats and habitat material for other animals. And in doing so, they protect our food supply, suppress disease vectors, and keep forests and other ecosystems healthy. This doesn't even touch on the ways spiders may benefit us with research into how we can synthesize and use spider silk, or how venom is used in medicine, or how the mechanics of their bodies have inspired new technologies. I'll get into those things in future episodes. But out there in the natural world, they're doing all of these things and more, and they do some of it in your house too. I think it's fair to say that we'd be toast without spiders. As the late Norm Platnick, arguably one of the greatest spider researchers ever, pointed out, we'd face famine without them. So, yeah, I think they're just as important as bees. So the next time you see that spider hanging out in the corner of your kitchen window, give her a little nod of thanks, because these creatures work pretty hard. That wraps up this episode of Spider Basics Beyond the 8 Legs. A big thank you to Catherine Scott, Sean McCann, Nancy Miorelli, and Andrea Haberkern for some support and materials for this video. That was unfortunate. Anyway, editing Travis here. Since I shot that, a bunch of other people have contributed stuff to this video. So thank you to John Dunbar, Kevin Wiener from All Bugs Go to Kevin, Mikey from CoolCritters, Jack from Jack's World of Wildlife, and Evan and Harrison from the Wildlife Brothers. Thanks for the material, guys. Really appreciate it. A big thanks to my wife for helping me figure out how to present all of this in a coherent way without rambling on. And of course, thank you to my patrons for supporting this channel. If you want to get some exclusive content, some behind-the-scenes stuff, and stories about day-to-day encounters I have with spiders or things I observe from keeping many of them, go check out my Patreon. If you enjoy this channel or find it helpful, Patreon is the very best way to support it. It really helps me out and lets me continue making these videos, and I deeply appreciate the support people have shown me there. You can also check out my Shopify store and get yourself one of these, or some of the other merch there. That really helps the channel as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what you thought of this video, and tell me what questions you might have about spiders. I can try to answer them in upcoming videos. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time on Spider Basics Beyond the 8 Legs. Cheers!